Welcoming into the program Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and always great to speak to you, sir. How are you today? It's been 2 years since the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan. I know that this time period for all Americans and certainly all veterans. This time of year is always going to be heavy on our hearts, knowing that we lost 13 members of our military and the respect of the world in the way that we pulled out. So let me ask you, in the 2 years since the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan, there's been a lot of debate, Lieutenant Colonel, about what went right, which it seems to me wasn't much, and what went wrong. But let's talk about the lead up. We had clear indications that the Taliban was taking over town after town, heading towards Kabul, rampaging across Afghanistan. Yet President Biden did pull the military out. But it wasn't just that we pulled out, it's the way that we left. Talk about what we've learned in the last 2 years of what went wrong.
Well, it was good to be with you, Dan, and I spent 2.5 years over there in Afghanistan, based down in Kandahar, training the Afghan army. I don't think we've learned anything because Joe Biden thinks it was a great success, and he continues to pat himself on the back. No one has been held responsible, accountable. I can't think of anything good that has come out of that pullout because, as you said, our foreign policy seems weak. It has encouraged countries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Islamic jihadists because now, once again, we have a terrorist sanctuary base that's established there. We turned our backs on the Afghan people, especially the women and the little girls who now are going back living under the repressive jihadism and Sharia law of the Taliban, took away all those opportunities. We left some $80 billion of military equipment, which the Taliban is selling to anyone that will purchase it. And, of course, they're going to reverse engineer it and get all of our technology from that, as well as he gave up one of the most strategic air bases we could have, and that was Bagram Air Base. And you talk about the 13 who lost their lives on that fateful day. No one is talking about the 7 who have committed suicide that were also part of that fateful day, and of course those who were injured as well. And if you saw the hearings of the Gold Star families a couple of weeks ago up there on the House of Representatives, it should have just ripped your heart out.
Well, it is. I didn't see the hearings. I saw a bunch of video from the hearings, and it is. They feel. They felt ignored that day, and they feel ignored since they came home. And that day will live with them forever, the ones that came home. And, of course, there is the issue with the suicides, which is constantly a problem with our veterans. And so the more that we look at what President Biden did wrong, and you just ripped off, about 2 minutes worth of issues that are all really the result of President Biden and his mistakes. And so I guess the question is, we all know that Biden is delusional. I mean, at least I would say that President Biden is delusional about a number of different things. Democrats, though, will say that Donald Trump actually left Biden the plan to pull out and that Biden was just executing Trump's plan. That's a bit disingenuous, I would say, because Biden moved the dates and made mistakes with the pullout. You just mentioned a whole bunch of issues that are specific to Joe Biden. But we know that the intelligence showed that Kabul would fall, and yet Joe Biden continued with the pullout. Donald Trump has said, well, he would have put a stop and he would have warned the Taliban. He would have warned the Taliban that if you continue down this road, we are going to stay and ensure that peace remains. So who's right in that whole argument, according to you, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West?
Well, I'll tell you, first and foremost, I would never go into negotiations with a known international terrorist organization. But at least Donald Trump had a conditions-based plan of withdrawal. Joe Biden comes in and he just picks an arbitrary date. I guess he wanted to celebrate on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. But what ended up happening, we saw the Taliban marching through Kabul on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And guess how that made people in New York and Washington, D.C. and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the people that lost their loved ones on that day, feel. So, again, no one has been held responsible and accountable. And if the Democrats want to play that game about President Trump leaving a plan for him to execute, well, President Trump also left a pretty good plan for a secure border. But for whatever reason, Joe Biden decided he didn't want to follow that plan. And, I just pulled over here in Uvalde, Texas. I'm going to spend the next 3 days down here on the border where things are not good. They have been exacerbated because of this Biden administration and this new app that he is providing illegal immigrants. And they're not migrants, they're illegal immigrants, and especially the single military age males that we see coming across the border. So foreign policy failure, national security failure, unconstitutional actions on our border, which leads to a national security issue as well. So being a domestic or foreign policy as far as our security, Joe Biden's a failure.
You had mentioned you had spent some time in Kandahar and you were training the Afghanistan military. And one of the things, and I've interviewed a lot of veterans and I have such respect. One of the things that I had a really great conversation with this particular veteran about, who was also someone who was training folks there in the military in Afghanistan, got really close to the local tribes and so forth. It's been very heartbreaking for people such as yourself who worked closely with the military only to see what happened. I mean, they were decimated, and now you've got all these members of the military, our allies that were killed. They've disappeared, the hands of the Taliban. And so there seems to be, for veterans, there's a lot that they're dealing with. It's almost like this one particular veteran described it almost like survivor's guilt a little bit. He's back home here in the States, but he left all those friends and what he considered family back in Afghanistan. He doesn't know what happened to them. So there's a lot going on as it relates to the mental challenges of our veterans.
No, you're absolutely right. There's a great book out there written by a dear friend of mine, Chad Robichaux, who was a Marine Force reconnaissance operator and also became a intelligence operator, and how he came up with the plan to go back in and get his interpreter translator, Aziz, as well as his family, and they have settled down in Houston. And the story in that book is just, hair-raising of how the State Department, our own State Department, got in the way and tried to deny people from being able to do what needed to be done. Just the same as we saw the denial to engage the suicide bomber on that day at Hamid Karzai International Airport. And then you had the drone strike of a person that was an ally to us, a person that had been working with us and helping us, that they said was a terrorist. But yet still, no one has been held responsible. No one has been held accountable, being it the President, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, no one at all, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So it is really painful for us that spent, our blood and treasure over there. And as we say in the military, some gave all gave some. And to know that it has all been in vain. And 2 years ago when we saw the Taliban marching through the streets of Kabul, that was very painful. And my wife even had to, say, I know that you're hurting. And I said, absolutely right. Because I remember seeing little girls go to school, and we took that dream away from them.
Let's talk about that, if we could. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West is joining us on WMAL and the Vince Colonnese Show. Dan Mandis in for Vince. So a lot has been made, and should be, regarding women and girls' rights in Afghanistan. Talk about the struggle for their, freedoms in Afghanistan when, 20 years ago, the progress that was made over that 20 years, and then how quickly those freedoms were eliminated once the Taliban took over.
Yeah. Well, think about it. There was a generation of little girls and some women who had never known the repressive regime of the Taliban. They grew up and they were able to get an education. There were women that were able to open up businesses. And if you read reports now, Taliban is cracking down on women-owned businesses and forcing them back into the house, forcing them into marriages with Taliban fighters. They were able to go out and drive, not able to do that, and forcing them back into the burqa. And so I have to ask, where are all these quote-unquote feminists, here in the United States of America? Where are all the pink hat ladies? They're very quick to come out and, complain, and Madonna talking about how she felt she wanted to blow up the White House. But when we see this repressive tyranny on their sisters over there in Afghanistan, they're silent. Mum's the word. So I just call them as hypocrites.
We talk about the Joe Biden has been on the record as saying that his military advisors told him, Biden says this, that his military advisors told him that they wanted to see a full pullout. His military advisors have said, no, we told him to leave a small contingent, and those conversations never happened. I mean, you know how this stuff works in Washington, D.C. What makes sense to you, if anything, about all this?
Well, you want to believe that the senior military leadership did advise him based upon sound military principles and doctrine. But with this crew that we have up there with, Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff Milley, Secretary of Defense Austin, who knows? It's kind of like the Keystone Cops or the Abbott and Costello skit, who's on first, what's on second. I mean, you just don't know what's going on. But the bottom line is this. 13 young men and a woman did not have to lose their lives on that fateful day back at Harman Karzai International Airport. And someone needs to step up and say, I'm responsible. And, when Joe Biden is there at the ramp ceremony, and not once, not twice, but 3 times, looks down at his watch, that's a slap in the face to those families. That's a slap in the face to every member of the United States military. And
I was sickened by that. I was absolutely sickened when I saw that. And part of what is we talk about Afghanistan and America's future, how much has Afghanistan turned into a terrorist training ground? Is it as bad as it once was? Is it worse? Is it, what's the status?
Well, I mean, you look at what just happened recently in Philadelphia, where we had the teenager that was making contact with Al-Qaeda and had gone out there and purchased materials to make an improvised explosive device. So the threat of Islamic jihadism is still there. And when you have an open and porous border, like Joe Biden has unconstitutionally implemented, that means that those people that were released from prisons over there, they're now free. They've gone back to either the Taliban, ISIS-K, or some of these other groups, the Haqqani Network. They're looking for payback. And the cartels, which are a transnational narco-criminal terrorist organization themselves, they are going to get anyone across the board that pays them. So now you have the Taliban selling $80 billion of military equipment, which means they're getting funding, which means that they can get people across this border by paying off the drug cartels, who are absolutely happy to do that. And we know that the drug cartels are openly carrying weapons on our side of the Rio Grande River. We saw that in the surveillance cameras just a week and a half ago.
Well, I mean, it feels like we are being assaulted by all these different nations, right? You've got Afghanistan, you've got, all of these drugs that are, being made in China. They're being sent to Mexico. They're being, manufactured in Mexico and across our southern border. But the one commonality with all of that is where you are headed to, which is the southern border. So you're going down to the southern border, or you're already there. Whereabouts are you going to be, and what are you looking to investigate?
Well, I'm going to be in Kinney County, which is 1,500 square miles. It sits right between Del Rio and Eagle Pass. And Kinney County is a county of about 3,100 people, and great sheriff down there. You need to get Sheriff Brad Coe of Kinney County on the show. He's only got about 7 or 8 sheriff's deputies to cover 1,500 square miles. So once a quarter, I come down here, try to help him out, get out there and walk the ground with his ground tracking team and ride patrols with his folks, because no one should be out there in a vehicle by themselves when you're looking at this being a combat zone, really, south of U.S. Highway 90, which is where I am right now. Like I said, I pulled over in Uvalde. I got about another 30 miles to get to Brackettville, Kinney County, and I'll be there till Sunday morning.
Well, I so appreciate you taking time to spend with us. I've got to ask you, you're very well-rounded, and you know a lot about a lot of different subjects, Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. When you look at what's happening in, a place like, Washington, D.C., certainly New York City, the mayor there, Eric Adams, they're dealing with all of these migrants. And now you have, in fact, there was a big story in the New York Post, I think it was either this morning or yesterday, where they're talking about, progressives and Democrats all across the country. They're now up in arms because their towns are being overridden by migrants, illegal aliens, and so forth. And we talk about, you and I have been talking about how rarely is anyone held accountable within the Biden administration. Well, now you have Democrats who are in these towns, in these cities that are overrun, and now they're asking the question that Republicans and conservatives have been asking for years: where is the accountability, specifically when it comes to Biden and the border? So what is your feeling when you see, I mean, I will tell you that I kind of chuckle with what's going on in New York. I feel sorry for New Yorkers who are impacted by what's going on there and in D.C. and other places where they're having these challenges.
Well, it's very interesting that people up there in New York City complain about how their children won't be able to go out and play on the soccer fields because they're being converted into shelters. You know, here in Brackettville, children don't go out to play when it starts to get dark because you have these high-speed chases and drive-thrus, and you have these bailouts, and you don't want a hostage situation where one of these illegals bail out and, you know, snatch up a child. So these people down here along the border have been living in terror for quite some time, and their communities are being overrun. And so when the left says that they're happy to be sanctuary cities, although I don't agree with, you know, busing illegal immigrants, you know, deeper into our country, I think it's been a very revealing thing to see them complain now about the very thing they were so proud to assert that they were, a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state. But without a doubt, we've got to get a better president in the White House that can get back to constitutionally securing our border and making sure that we provide the domestic security, the national security for our American citizens, because we should not be living in fear in our own country.
And we'll leave it there. Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, thank you very much for joining us here on News Talk 105.9 FM.